A single object can rewrite the story of our entire species. This is a journey through 15 ancient artifacts that did exactly that, forcing historians to tear up old textbooks and see our ancestors in a completely new light. You will gain a new understanding of human ingenuity, one that proves our past is far more surprising and interconnected than we ever imagined. What if a 2,000-year-old computer was found at the bottom of the sea? How could a simple stone slab unlock a language lost for millennia? By the end, you will see history not as a fixed record, but as a living puzzle where every discovery changes the picture. What part of the ancient world most captures your curiosity? From the dark, silent floor of the Aegean Sea, a diver's hand closed around a formless, green lump of metal. To the sponge hunters exploring that ancient Roman shipwreck near the island of Antikythera, it was just another piece of junk, a curiosity perhaps, but certainly not treasure. It was catalogued, stored away, and largely forgotten for nearly half a century, a corroded mystery waiting for the right eyes to see it. Then, slowly, those eyes began to look closer. Researchers noticed faint traces of writing, the ghost of a gear tooth beneath the crust. This was not a statue fragment or a simple tool. It was a machine. Advanced X-ray imaging would eventually peel back the layers of time and corrosion, revealing a breathtaking clockwork universe contained within a space no larger than a shoebox. Dozens of interlocking bronze gears, precisely cut and mounted within a wooden frame, formed an intricate analog computer dating back over 2,000 years. This was the Antikythera Mechanism. Its purpose, deciphered from the tiny inscriptions on its plates, was to model the cosmos. By turning a hand crank, an ancient user could calculate the positions of the sun and moon, predict lunar and solar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, and even track the 4-year cycle of the Panhellenic Games, a precursor to our modern Olympics. The discovery did not just add a footnote to history, it ripped out an entire chapter and demanded a rewrite. Before this lump of bronze and rust was understood, the prevailing view was that the ancient Greeks were brilliant theorists, philosophers of geometry and astronomy, but not practical engineers of such staggering mechanical complexity. This single device, lost in a shipwreck and recovered by chance, proved that Hellenistic craftsmen were building geared mechanisms of a sophistication that would not be seen again in Europe until the cathedral clocks of the 14th century. It forces us to ask a humbling question: how much knowledge, how many marvels of ancient technology were lost in the fires of libraries, the sinkings of ships, or simply the slow erosion of time? The Antikythera Mechanism is a surviving whisper of a scientific conversation we thought had gone silent for a millennium. That whisper from the deep sea revealed a hidden chapter of Greek science, but for another civilization, its entire voice had been stolen by time. In the summer of 1799, French soldiers were not searching for history, they were building a fort. Their task was to reinforce an old Ottoman wall near the Egyptian port city of Rashid, which Europeans called Rosetta. As they tore down ancient masonry to reuse the stone, a lieutenant named Pierre-François Bouchard noticed something unusual. One dark slab of granodiorite was remarkably smooth and covered in crisp, carved markings. He recognized Greek letters, but the other two scripts were a mystery. This was not just building rubble, it was a message. The Rosetta Stone, as it came to be known, bore a single decree from the year 196 before the Common Era, issued by a council of priests to honor the young pharaoh Ptolemy V. Its genius, its world-altering power, lay not in its content but in its form. The same text was repeated 3 times in 3 different scripts: sacred hieroglyphs, the everyday demotic script of the people, and the administrative Greek of the ruling Ptolemaic dynasty. For over 1,000 years, the meaning of hieroglyphs had been utterly lost. To the world, they were mere magical symbols, decorative and silent. The stone presented a linguistic bridge, a parallel text offering scholars their first real chance to cross from the known world of ancient Greek into the unknown world of the pharaohs. The race to decipher it became an intellectual obsession, a fierce competition spanning decades. The ultimate victor was a French linguistic prodigy named Jean-François Champollion. He worked with a relentless focus, comparing the Greek names like Ptolemy and Cleopatra with their cartouched counterparts in the hieroglyphic section. In September 1822, after a feverish period of breakthrough, he confirmed his hypothesis. Hieroglyphs were not just pictograms, they were a complex mix of phonetic signs, logograms, and determinatives. The stone had given him the key, and with it he turned the lock. The effect was instantaneous and profound. It was as if a vast library, its books sealed shut for centuries, had suddenly been thrown open. The inscriptions on temple walls, the texts in tombs, the records on papyrus all began to speak. We could finally read the words of Ramses the Great, understand the hymns to the gods, and follow the administrative details of daily life along the Nile. The Rosetta Stone did not simply add to Egyptian history, it resurrected the civilization's own voice. It transformed Egyptology from a study of silent monuments into a conversation with the past, proving that language is the most durable artifact of all, waiting only for the right key to be found. The voice of the pharaohs was unlocked by a stone, but another desert would soon yield a chorus of voices, preserved in silence for 2 millennia. In the stark, sun-baked cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea, a young Bedouin shepherd was searching for a lost goat. Frustrated, he tossed a rock into a small opening in the rock face, expecting to scare the animal out. Instead, he heard the distinct, sharp sound of shattering pottery. Climbing into the cave to investigate, his eyes adjusted to the dim light to reveal tall, narrow clay jars. Inside them were not treasures of gold or silver, but bundles of old leather and papyrus darkened with age. This accidental discovery in 1947, near the settlement of Qumran, began the greatest manuscript treasure hunt of the 20th century. What the young shepherd had found were the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Over the next decade, more caves would be searched, yielding over 900 separate documents. These were not just random pages, they were an ancient library, carefully hidden away in the face of a growing conflict with Roman forces. The texts were written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and they dated from as early as the 3rd century before the Common Era to the 1st century of the Common Era. Among these fragile fragments and complete scrolls were the oldest known copies of the Hebrew Bible by a staggering margin. Before this discovery, the oldest complete Hebrew text scholars were from the Middle Ages, copied around the year 1000. The Dead Sea Scrolls pushed that timeline back over 1,000 years, offering a direct line to the world of Second Temple Judaism. This provided an unprecedented textual bridge. For the first time, researchers could compare the biblical texts they knew with versions that were a millennium older. They held their breath, wondering how much the words had changed over 1,000 years of copying. The overwhelming result was a profound confirmation of the text's careful transmission. Yet the scrolls also contained fascinating variations, alternative readings, and previously unknown works. They revealed a period of intense religious ferment and rich diversity. Here was not a single monolithic faith, but a landscape of different Jewish communities, like the Essenes who likely stored the scrolls, engaged in deep debate about law, ritual, and the coming of a messianic age. This library in the desert illuminated the very soil from which both rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity would grow. The scrolls did not just give us older books, they gave us context. They transformed a shadowy, theoretical period of religious development into a vividly documented era of searching, questioning, and profound spiritual creativity, all preserved in jars, waiting for a stray rock to set the story free. The silence of the desert scrolls spoke of faith and community, but from a muddy field in England, a different kind of voice would emerge, one forged in iron and gold. In the quiet Suffolk countryside, a series of grassy mounds had long intrigued locals, rumored to be the graves of ancient kings. When archaeologist Basil Brown began excavating the largest mound in 1939, his trowel struck not earth but the ghostly outline of a ship. This was no stone tomb but a royal burial, a 90-foot-long vessel hauled from the river and buried whole, a final resting place for a warrior king. As they worked with painstaking care, the team uncovered a treasure that would stun the world. Among the silver plates from Byzantium, the gold coins from Francia, and the exquisitely crafted jewelry, one object stood apart. It was a helmet crushed by the weight of centuries of soil, but its majesty was unmistakable. Reconstructed from hundreds of fragments, the Sutton Hoo Helmet revealed itself as a masterpiece of early medieval art. Its iron frame was covered with panels of tinned bronze, creating a gleaming, silvery face. Across the brow marched intricate patterns of interlacing animals, and the eyebrows were inlaid with deep red garnets, giving the mask a fierce, intelligent expression. A crest of iron, shaped like a flying dragon, ran from the nose guard over the crown, its wings forming the creature's eyebrows. This was not merely protective gear, it was a statement of power, identity, and myth. For generations, historians had referred to the centuries following Rome's withdrawal from Britain as the Dark Ages, picturing a time of cultural collapse, poverty, and isolation. The Sutton Hoo burial ship, likely for King Redwald of East Anglia, shattered that myth completely. Here was staggering wealth and artistic sophistication from the early 7th century. The artifacts told a story of far-reaching connections, silver from the Mediterranean, jewels echoing Scandinavian styles, and craftsmanship that rivaled any in Europe. This was not a backwater, but a center of a vibrant, interconnected world. The helmet itself, likely worn in ceremonial pageants rather than battle, symbolized a ruler who was both a warlord and a patron of immense skill. It forced a complete reassessment of Anglo-Saxon England, revealing it as a period of rich cultural fusion, complex social structures, and artistic brilliance that lit up the so-called darkness. The soil of Sutton Hoo held not just a king, but an entire era, waiting to be seen in a new and dazzling light. Her father lowered his lamp, and the flickering light brought the ceiling to life. Great, powerful bison seemed to breathe on the stone, painted in rich reds and blacks, their forms shaded to create a startling illusion of depth and movement. The young girl's innocent exclamation in that Spanish cave, Altamira, in 1879, would ignite one of the most contentious debates in the history of archaeology. Her father, Marcelino Sanz de Sochuola, an amateur archaeologist, immediately recognized the significance. He saw the sophistication, the artistic mastery. But when he presented his findings to the academic world, he was met not with awe but with scorn. The leading prehistorians of the day dismissed the paintings as an obvious modern fraud. How could Ice Age hunters, those primitive brutes struggling for survival, possibly possess such artistic skill and symbolic vision? The very idea threatened the established view of human prehistory. For decades, the cave was ridiculed and its discoverer disgraced. The turning point came only after similar caves were discovered in France, like Font de Gaume, whose ancient origins were undeniable. The scientific community was forced to perform a complete and humbling reversal. The Altamira bison were authentic, and they were astoundingly old, created over 15,000 years ago. This was more than a correction, it was a revolution in understanding. It proved that our distant ancestors, living in a world of ice and mammoths, were not just clever toolmakers, they were artists and storytellers. They had the capacity for abstract thought, for observing the natural world with a profound intimacy and translating it into enduring symbols. The act of painting deep within a cave, away from the living areas, suggests a ritual or spiritual purpose, a need to connect with forces beyond daily survival. Altamira shattered the myth of the grunting caveman and replaced it with the image of the thoughtful human, one who sought meaning and beauty, who expressed a complex inner life on the walls of the world. This single cave, authenticated after such resistance, founded the entire field of cognitive archaeology, teaching us to look for the mind behind the tool, the spirit within the skeleton. It asks us to reconsider what it means to be human across unimaginable stretches of time. The artistry of Altamira revealed a deep human spirit, but on the other side of the world, an emperor sought to command an army for eternity. In March 1974, a group of farmers in China's Shaanxi province were simply trying to find water. Their shovels bit into the dry earth, hoping to tap a well that would sustain their village. Instead, they struck something hard and unyielding, a fragment of baked clay that, when brushed clean, revealed itself as a life-sized human shoulder. What they had uncovered was not a well, but the outer guard post of a silent, subterranean empire. Archaeologists called to the site would soon realize the staggering truth. That single shoulder belonged to one of thousands of terracotta soldiers, an entire military formation buried in precise battle order for over 2,000 years. This was the mausoleum complex of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor to unify China under a single rule. The historical texts had spoken of his monumental tomb, guarded by rivers of mercury and wonders untold, but they could not prepare anyone for the visceral reality of the Terracotta Army. As excavation pits were opened, the scale was almost incomprehensible. Row upon row of infantrymen, archers, charioteers, and cavalry officers stood at attention, each figure crafted with astonishing individuality. No two faces are exactly alike, their features, hairstyles, and expressions varying to represent soldiers drawn from across the newly forged empire. Their original paint, now mostly faded, would have made the ranks blaze with color. They held real bronze weapons, swords, spears, and crossbows, many still sharp enough to draw blood. This was not a symbolic gesture, it was a meticulous recreation of imperial power, designed to project the emperor's authority beyond death itself. The discovery did more than confirm old legends, it gave them physical, overwhelming weight. The sheer logistical effort, the centralized control required to marshal thousands of artisans for such a project, laid bare the absolute might of the Qin state. It showed an emperor so obsessed with order and permanence that he would command the earth itself to remember his reign. Yet, for all its display of control, the army also speaks to the era's incredible artistry and technological skill. From the advanced kilns that fired the massive figures to the precise metallurgy of their weapons. The silent ranks guard more than a tomb, they stand as a permanent testament to the moment China was forged into a single idea, an ambition cast in clay and bronze, waiting for a farmer's shovel to bring it back into the light of history. A farmer's shovel can unearth an army, but a bookseller's discovery can bury us in deeper mystery. In 1912, a rare book dealer named Wilfred Voynich was combing through a chest of manuscripts in a Jesuit college in Italy. What he pulled out was a small, unassuming codex bound in vellum. Its pages, however, were filled with a script unlike any he had ever seen, a flowing script of unknown characters, accompanied by illustrations that were both meticulous and utterly alien. Plants that grew nowhere on Earth, celestial charts of unfamiliar constellations, and diagrams of tiny, naked women bathing in what seemed to be interconnected green pools. This was the Voynich Manuscript, and it has become the world's most famous unsolved puzzle. Carbon dating places its vellum in the early 15th century, and its illustrations suggest a European origin, yet its language remains completely impenetrable. For over a century, it has been a siren call to the world's greatest cryptographers. Teams from both world wars, including American and British military codebreakers who later cracked the Enigma machine, turned their formidable skills to the manuscript and failed. In the 21st century, sophisticated artificial intelligence models have analyzed its patterns, searching for the hidden grammar of a lost tongue. They have found statistical structures that resemble a real language, but the meaning remains locked away, the sentences stubbornly silent. This is the artifact's profound and humbling challenge to archaeology. We can hold it, we can date it, we can analyze its ink and its parchment, yet we cannot read it. It represents a total disconnect between the physical object and the intellectual world it represents. It forces a confrontation with the limits of our understanding. Perhaps it is an elaborate hoax, though the consistent, complex structure argues against that. Perhaps it records a forgotten system of herbal knowledge or an esoteric spiritual text, its code meant for only a select few. The Voynich Manuscript stands as a permanent reminder that history is not a neatly solved equation. Some voices from the past choose not to speak to us, guarding their secrets in plain sight. It keeps alive the tantalizing, unsettling possibility of whole ways of thinking, whole systems of knowledge that have vanished without a key, leaving behind only a beautiful, frustrating ghost of an idea. The Voynich Manuscript guards its meaning in silence, but another artifact from the ancient Middle East presents a puzzle we can actually test. In the ruins of a Parthian village near modern Baghdad, a simple clay jar was unearthed. Inside it, archaeologists found a copper cylinder, sealed at the bottom with asphalt, and an iron rod suspended perfectly down its center. Dated to sometime between 250 years before the Common Era and 250 years of the Common Era, this odd assembly seemed like little more than a curious storage vessel. But to one researcher in the 1930s, Wilhelm Koenig, its design sparked a radical hypothesis. He suspected it was not a jar at all, but a cell. When he filled a replica with an acidic liquid like vinegar or grape juice, something remarkable happened. A small but measurable electric charge, around 1 volt, was produced between the copper and the iron. This was the so-called Baghdad Battery. The immediate question, of course, was why? What possible use could a 2,000-year-old civilization have for a trickle of electricity? The theories are as fascinating as the object itself. Some suggest it could have been used for electroplating, to deposit a thin layer of gold or silver onto other metals, a practice known from the region. Others propose a medical application using the faint tingle for therapeutic purposes, much like the electric fish used in the ancient Mediterranean. A more symbolic interpretation points to its potential use in religious rituals, where a hidden power could make a metal idol seem to vibrate or a priest's touch feel charged with divine energy. The true purpose may never be known for certain, and that ambiguity is precisely its power. The Baghdad Battery does not need a definitive answer to rewrite history. Its mere existence, its demonstrable function, forces a profound shift in perspective. For centuries, the narrative of electrical discovery began with figures like Benjamin Franklin and Alessandro Volta in the 18th century. This humble clay pot suggests that the fundamental principles of a galvanic cell were not just understood, but potentially experimented with over 1,000 years earlier. It challenges the linear timeline of invention, replacing it with a messier, more interesting story of sporadic curiosity and independent discovery. It asks us to look at the artisans and scholars of Mesopotamia not just as masters of agriculture and astronomy, but as tinkerers in their own right, probing the hidden forces of the natural world with the tools they had. This artifact whispers that scientific insight is not the property of any one era, but a spark that can flash into being, be forgotten, and wait patiently in the earth to illuminate our modern assumptions. A spark of electricity from a clay pot hints at forgotten experiments, but on a sun-drenched island, a different kind of power was pressed into clay. Within the ruins of the Minoan palace of Phaistos on Crete, Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernia carefully lifted a flat, round disc of fired clay from the ancient soil in 1908. It was not broken, not a fragment, but a complete and startlingly unique object. Both of its faces were covered, from the outer edge spiraling tightly into the center, with a series of tiny, precise symbols. Each symbol was not carved by hand, but stamped into the soft clay with a seal before firing, making the Phaistos disc the earliest known example of movable type printing in the world. And there the certainties end. The 45 distinct signs on the disc show a man's head with a feathered headdress, a helmet, a ship, a beehive, a cat's head, and a host of other figures. They are arranged in groups divided by lines, clearly suggesting a written message running along that spiral path. But this script is utterly alone. It matches no other writing system from the ancient Aegean, not the later Linear A or Linear B found on Crete and mainland Greece. It appears, is used once on this single object, and then vanishes from the archaeological record completely. Dating to the middle of the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, the disc is a message in a bottle from a sophisticated civilization, the Minoans, who built labyrinthine palaces and vibrant frescoes, yet we cannot read a single word of it. Is it a hymn to a goddess, a legal decree from the palace, a trader's inventory, or a magical incantation? The theories are as numerous as the symbols. Some researchers argue it is a religious text, a portable prayer. Others see it as a game board or a geometric puzzle. There are those who suggest it is not native to Crete at all, but an import from Anatolia or even farther east, a diplomatic gift inscribed with a foreign tongue that never took root on the island. Its undeciphered nature is its profound lesson. The Phaistos disc is a stark monument to the gaps in our knowledge. We can reconstruct Minoan architecture, admire their art, and trace their trade routes, but a core element of their thought, a system of recording information, remains locked inside this clay circle. It whispers of a possibility, perhaps a brief experiment in writing that failed, or a specialized script used for a purpose so specific only one example survives. It forces humility upon us, reminding that for all our grand narratives about the past, some of the most elegant and deliberate creations of ancient minds choose to keep their secrets, challenging us to wonder what stories are still curled in that silent, eternal spiral. A clay circle from Crete holds its secrets tight, but a bronze disc from a German forest would offer a clearer glimpse into the ancient mind. Its journey to our hands, however, began not with an archaeologist's trowel, but with a metal detector in the hands of treasure hunters. In 1999, two men were looting a prehistoric site atop the Mittelberg Hill when their equipment signaled a find. What they pulled from the earth was a bizarre, greenish bronze disc about the size of a dinner plate, strangely heavy and inlaid with tarnished gold symbols. Unaware of its true significance, they sold it on the black market, and the disc began a dangerous underground journey through Europe. It was only through a meticulous police sting operation several years later that this priceless artifact was recovered, saving it from being lost to private collectors forever. Once in the hands of researchers, its true nature began to shine. Carefully cleaned, the Nebra Sky Disc revealed itself as a stunning masterpiece. Against a deep blue-green background of bronze, possibly originally enhanced with a paste of malachite to mimic the night sky, gold appliques depicted a crescent moon, a full sun or perhaps a full moon, and a cluster of 32 stars. Two golden arcs along the edges were later added, and finally, a third arc at the bottom, often interpreted as a solar boat, a mythological vessel carrying the sun. Scientific analysis dated the disc's creation to approximately 1600 years before the Common Era, making it the oldest known portable representation of the cosmos in the world. But this was far more than a pretty picture. The arrangement was precise and functional. The angle between the two opposing arcs is exactly 82 degrees, which matches the angle between the sunset points at summer and winter solstice from the very hill where it was buried. This was a sophisticated instrument. By aligning the disc with the horizon, a Bronze Age observer could use it to determine the solstices, the critical turning points of the year. This allowed a farming society to synchronize a lunar calendar, which is short, with the solar year, which is longer, ensuring that rituals and planting seasons stayed in their proper place. The disc's final edition, the Golden Boat, suggests a rich mythology woven into this practical science, a belief that the sun traveled across the sky and through the underworld on a celestial vessel. The impact of this single object cannot be overstated. Before its discovery, the narrative of early northern Europe was often one of simple, warlike tribes. The Nebra Sky Disc shattered that simplistic view. It proved that the communities of Central Europe, nearly 1,000 years before the rise of classical Greece, were not just surviving, they were observing, calculating, and codifying the heavens. They possessed a systematic, transferable knowledge of astronomy, a shared cosmological world, sophisticated enough to be cast in bronze and gold. This was not primitive stargazing, it was a complex intellectual achievement, a bridge between the earth and the sky forged in metal, waiting centuries for its story to be told. Their bronze disc mapped a cosmos of order, but on the most isolated inhabited island on Earth, a different kind of celestial alignment was being carved from a volcano. For centuries, the giant stone faces of Rapa Nui, Easter Island, have stood as global icons of mystery and seeming folly. Towering over the barren landscape, their backs to the sea, the Moai were seen by early European visitors as the tragic legacy of a people who had recklessly destroyed their own paradise, cutting down every last tree to move statues until collapse was inevitable. This narrative of ecocide became a cautionary tale for the entire planet, but the ground itself held a different story, one that archaeologists have only recently learned to read. Excavations at the main quarry, Rono Raraku, revealed it was not just a workshop but a sacred landscape. The partially carved moai still embedded in the slopes were not abandoned failures, but intended to remain there, integral to the site's spiritual power. The discovery of thousands of stone tools, or toki, showed a society that organized labor efficiently, not desperately. Analysis of the soil around the massive platforms, the ahu, uncovered evidence of sophisticated farming, with lithic mulch gardens that enhanced productivity in the island's challenging winds. The statues were not an act of vanity but of profound connection. Each moai represented a deified ancestor, believed to channel spiritual energy, or mana, to protect the living community. The later addition of the giant red stone topknots, or pukao, which were rolled-up ramps not dragged with logs, was a separate feat of engineering and symbolic artistry. This was not a short, frenzied binge of construction, but a sustained cultural project that lasted for centuries, adapting as conditions changed. The real story of Rapa Nui is not one of foolishness, but of breathtaking resilience and creativity in the face of genuine ecological constraints. When the islanders saw the forests thinning, they innovated, turning to stone-based agriculture and focusing their communal efforts on the spiritual anchors that gave their society meaning. The narrative shift is monumental. It transforms these silent giants from tombstones for a failed society into testaments to a successful one, a people who navigated immense isolation with ingenuity and whose legacy is not a warning about collapse, but a lesson in long-term adaptation and the enduring human need to carve meaning, quite literally, into the very foundations of the world. The ocean floor holds more than shipwrecks, it holds ledgers. In 1982, a sponge diver named Mehmet Sakir was working near the small Turkish promontory of Uluburun. What he saw on the seabed, 50 meters below, was not the broken timbers of a ship, but a dazzling, scattered tableau of strange shapes. he reported seeing metal biscuits with strange handles. These were the first copper ingots, and they marked the discovery of one of the most significant archaeological sites ever found beneath the sea. The Uluburun Shipwreck was a merchant vessel that sank around 1300 years before the Common Era, a floating warehouse from the height of the Late Bronze Age. Over the next decade, underwater archaeologists performed a meticulous, piece-by-piece recovery of its cargo, revealing a manifest that reads like a fantasy of ancient trade. There were 10 tons of raw copper from Cyprus, shaped into distinctive oxide ingots. Alongside them were ingots of precious tin, the two metals that, when combined, create bronze, the very lifeblood of the age. But this ship was not just carrying raw materials. Its hold was a treasure chest of international luxury. There were logs of fragrant ebony wood from Africa, elephant tusks ready to be carved into art, cobalt blue glass ingots from Mesopotamia, and golden jewelry from Canaan. There were pottery vessels from Mycenaean Greece, scarabs from Egypt, and a single, exquisite gold chalet bearing the likeness of a goddess. Even the personal items of the crew, stone anchors and bronze tools, told a story of a multicultural voyage. This single shipwreck did not just add items to a museum catalogue. It provided irrefutable physical proof of a theory historians could only guess at from scattered texts. Before Uluburun, the Bronze Age Mediterranean was often imagined as a world of walled palaces and isolated kingdoms, communicating only through occasional war or diplomacy. The wreck's cargo painted a radically different picture. Here was a vessel that had deliberately collected goods from at least 7 different major cultures across 3 continents, all on one voyage. It was a microcosm of a vast, organized, and staggeringly complex economic network. This was not casual coastal trading, but a professional, large-scale operation moving raw materials to manufacturing centers and finished luxuries to elite consumers across the known world. The ship itself was likely Canaanite or Cypriot, but its contents and destination were international. It forces us to replace the map of isolated dots with a web of constant, buzzing connections. The Bronze Age, as seen from the Uluburun seabed, was not a prelude to globalization. It was a fully realized, ancient form of it. This sunken time capsule redefined an entire era, revealing a world where a merchant's prosperity depended not on isolation, but on the ability to navigate between cultures, languages, and markets stretching from the Aegean to the Nile. A merchant ship's manifest reveals a connected ancient world, but a single piece of linen in a European cathedral would come to absorb the focus of the modern one. Housed in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, the shroud is a simple rectangle of herringbone weave cloth, just over 4 meters long. Its sole remarkable feature is a faint, straw-colored imprint, the ghostly negative image of a man who appears to have suffered physical trauma. For many faithful, this is the sacred burial cloth of a central figure in their tradition. For science, it became one of the most intensely studied artifacts in history, a perfect storm of mystery that would push forensic archaeology to its limits. The question was not merely one of age, but of how such an image could form on ancient linen at all. This drove an unprecedented, decades-long campaign of multidisciplinary investigation. Teams of chemists, physicists, textile experts, and forensic pathologists were granted rare access. They subjected threads to microscopic analysis, mapped the image's 3-dimensional properties, and debated whether pigments, acids, or some form of radiation could have created the stain. The pursuit of an answer led to innovations in photographic analysis and spectral imaging. In the late 1980s, a small sample was cut from a corner of the shroud and sent to 3 independent laboratories for radiocarbon dating. The results, published in 1989, converged on a medieval origin between the years 1260 and 1390. For many, this settled the matter as a skilled medieval creation. Yet, the very intensity of the debate that followed underscored the artifact's deeper significance. The scientific process itself was put on trial, with researchers questioning the sample's purity, pointing to potential contamination from a fire in the 1500s and proposing alternative dating models. This ongoing conversation, spanning faith and reason, demonstrated something profound about archaeology's modern role. The Shroud of Turin, regardless of its origin, acted as a powerful catalyst. It forced disparate scientific fields to collaborate on a single, tangible puzzle. It showed how public fascination could fuel decades of rigorous technical innovation, all focused on a silent piece of cloth. The artifact stands at a unique crossroads, where deep historical curiosity meets spiritual yearning, and where the tools of the modern age are deployed to interrogate a singular question from the past. It reminds us that sometimes the value of a relic lies not in a definitive verdict, but in the journey of inquiry it inspires, proving that our drive to understand can be as powerful as the mysteries we seek to solve. A single piece of linen can captivate the modern world, but an entire room of clay can resurrect a lost one. In the 1850s, as the British Museum's Austin Henry Layard and his successor Hormuzd Rassam excavated the great mounds of Nineveh in modern-day Iraq, they began to uncover rooms whose floors were not made of stone but of clay tablets. Not just a few, but tens of thousands of them, systematically stacked and organized, many bearing the inscription, "Property of the Palace of Ashurbanipal, King of the Universe, King of Assyria." They had found the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, a 7th century before the Common Era ruler, who was not only a conqueror but a voracious scholar. This was not a random cache, but the first deliberately assembled, systematically collected library in the world, a time capsule of Mesopotamian thought ordered by royal decree. The scale is almost unimaginable, over 30,000 cuneiform tablets and fragments, each one carefully inscribed with the wedge-shaped script that was the medium of writing for millennia. This library was Ashurbanipal's great project, his attempt to gather all the knowledge of his world under one roof. He sent scribes across his empire to copy texts from temple archives and older collections, building a comprehensive repository. And what did it contain? Everything. There were meticulous administrative records, lists of goods and personnel that detail the economy of an empire. There were scientific texts with observations of the stars and medical prescriptions for various ailments. There were legal codes and dictionaries, tools for governing and for understanding language itself. But most breathtakingly, there was literature. Among these tablets, archaeologists found the world's oldest surviving great work of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This poem, telling the story of a legendary king's quest for immortality and his confrontation with loss, gave us characters, emotions, and philosophical questions that feel strikingly human across 3,000 years. We met Gilgamesh and his wild friend Enkidu. We followed their adventures and we witnessed Gilgamesh's profound grief, a timeless exploration of what it means to face our own endings. Before this library was found, Mesopotamia was known mostly through the silent witness of its ziggurats and cylinder seals, impressive but mute. The Library of Ashurbanipal gave the civilization its voice. It allowed historians to stop merely cataloging objects and start listening to conversations. They could read a physician's notes, follow a legal argument, or get lost in a myth. This transformed archaeology's very purpose. It proved that to understand a culture, you must have its words, not just its weapons or its pottery. The library emphasized that textual evidence is the thread that weaves disparate material, finds into a coherent tapestry of intellectual life. It showed us that Ashurbanipal, for all his might as king of the universe, wanted to be remembered as a man of learning, a collector of wisdom. In these fire-hardened clay tablets, saved from the destruction that leveled Nineveh, we find not just data, but the humming, questioning, storytelling mind of an entire civilization, patiently waiting in the dark to speak again. The words of kings and the cargo of merchants reveal sophisticated societies. But what if the very first spark of civilization came not from a need for food, but from a need for meaning? In the dry, rocky hills of southeastern Turkey, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt followed a hunch in the 1990s. Locals had long referred to a hill as Göbekli Tepe, or Potbelly Hill, due to its shape, and old surveys had noted scattered flint chips. What Schmidt's team began to uncover, however, was not a simple settlement. They found the tips of massive, T-shaped limestone pillars, deliberately buried in the earth for millennia. As they excavated, an astonishing vision emerged. These were not isolated stones. They were arranged in great, circular enclosures with two towering central pillars, each weighing many tons, surrounded by a ring of slightly smaller ones. The stone was not raw, but masterfully carved. Across the smooth surfaces swarmed a menagerie of ancient memory: foxes, scorpions, lions, vultures, and snakes, all rendered with striking artistry and symbolic intent. Then came the dating, and the world of archaeology held its breath. This site was built around 9,600 years before the Common Era. To grasp that scale, these stone circles are 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. They were constructed before the invention of pottery, before the wheel, and most critically, before the widespread adoption of agriculture. This single fact sent a tremor through the foundations of human history. For over a century, the accepted narrative, called the Neolithic Revolution, was clear and logical. First, humans learned to farm. Agriculture produced surplus food, which allowed for permanent settlements. With stability and surplus came specialization, hierarchy, and the free time to develop complex art, religion, and monumental architecture. Civilization, in this story, is a product of economics. Göbekli Tepe stands this entire sequence on its head. Here, in a place with no evidence of year-round habitation, no fields of domesticated grain, we find the most monumental and symbolically complex architecture of its era anywhere on the planet. The builders were not farmers living in a village. They were likely hunter-gatherers coming together from across the region for a shared purpose. The implication is staggering. It suggests that the human drive to create meaning, to gather for ritual, to express a shared worldview through staggering collective effort, may have been the initial spark. The need to build and maintain this sacred place, to feed and organize the hundreds of people required to quarry, carve, and erect these pillars, could have been the very pressure that spurred the domestication of plants and animals. In other words, the cathedral came first, and the city grew up around it. Göbekli Tepe does not just add an older site to the timeline, it inverts our understanding of human motivation. It proposes that what ultimately pulled us together into civilization was not the stomach, but the spirit, a profound, shared desire to reach for something beyond mere survival, and to literally set that aspiration in stone for the ages. Each of these 15 keys turned in a lock, and the doors that swung open revealed not just new rooms, but entirely new wings in the mansion of human history. They were not merely found, they spoke back, challenging the very narratives we had built around them. This is the collective power of the artifact, a power that redefines not just what we know, but how we come to know it. Archaeology, at its most thrilling, is not a monologue delivered from the past. It is a dynamic, often argumentative dialogue. We ask questions of the soil, and sometimes, if we are listening carefully, the soil answers with something that makes us rethink our questions entirely. A corroded lump becomes a computer, a farmer's ditch yields an army, and a shepherd's tossed rock finds a library. Each instance is a reminder that the timeline of human achievement is not a straight, ascending line. It is a sprawling, interconnected web, with threads of brilliance that appear, vanish, and sometimes reappear millennia later. these discoveries collectively argue against a simplistic view of progress that paints our ancestors as primitive steps on a ladder leading to us. They were not just precursors, they were peers in ingenuity, facing their own worlds with observation, creativity, and a deep desire to make meaning. The true story these objects tell is one of resilience and connection, of Bronze Age merchants linking continents, of hunter-gatherers coordinating to raise pillars to the sky, of scholars across empires striving to collect all knowledge. When we hold even a fragment of their work, we are touching a conversation that spans thousands of years. We are reminded that history is never a finished book sitting on a shelf. It is a manuscript we are actively writing, with every pass of the trowel, every scan of a scanner, offering a chance to add a sentence, correct a paragraph, or sometimes discover a whole new chapter waiting silently beneath our feet. The past, it turns out, still has the power to surprise us, and in doing so, it expands our sense of what is possible, not just for them, but for the story we are all a part of telling. From celestial calculators to ritual pillars, these 15 artifacts are far more than museum pieces. They are milestones in humanity's enduring quest to understand itself and our place in the cosmos. Each one, from the Rosetta Stone's linguistic key to the Nebra Sky Disc's golden astronomy, teaches a profound lesson in humility. They remind us that for every answer we uncover, a dozen new questions wait in the shadows, and that the past is never as simple as our textbooks once claimed. This is the true gift of archaeology, not a list of facts, but a cultivated sense of wonder at the sheer ingenuity and resilience of those who walked this earth long before us. As we close this exploration, it is worth remembering that history's grand narrative is not written solely in the chronicles of kings and the outcomes of battles. It is etched just as deeply into the clay of a library tablet, woven into the linen of a shroud, and stamped onto the spiral of a clay disc. These objects are the silent witnesses, the patient storytellers. They wait in shipwrecks and caves, in farmers' fields and desert cliffs, for the moment a curious mind asks the right question. So let this be a call to stay curious, to look at the world with questioning eyes. The next artifact that redefines our understanding could be resting in an attic trunk, waiting in a plowed field, or hidden just beneath a city street, ready to whisper a new chapter of the human story. If this journey through time resonated with you, we would love to hear which of these artifacts captured your imagination most. Was it the ancient computer from the sea, or the inverted temple that came before the farm? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more deep dives into the enduring mysteries of our shared past.